Hi and welcome to The Print. I'm Praveen Swami. I'm a contributing editor. With me, Dr. Ajay Sani from the Institute of Conflict Management in Delhi and one of the leading experts on all things counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. A lot of commentary today and news about what is happening on the line of control and on the India-Pakistan border, about the unfolding state of the conflict. And I thought it would be a good time not to talk about any of these things, but instead look at where this conflict began, which is Jammu and Kashmir, and what this conflict might have, implications it might have for Kashmir going forward. So I'll start with some context, Ajay, giving our viewers a little bit of context, if I may. Last year was an exceptionally quiet year in Kashmir. Very, very, very few civilian casualties. And that's been part of a downtrend since 2019, despite some predictions. There have been very, very low levels of violence. And then we saw this tragedy in Pahalgam, one large massacre. Um, do you anticipate, is your understanding of what happened in Pahalgam that it was a one-off incident or part of a pattern of deliberate escalation by jihadi groups and their sponsors in Pakistan?
Look, first I'd like to speak of how incidents occur and how fatalities are inflicted. No
Okay.
terrorist can go into an operation saying, I will kill X number of people. Every terrorist
Right.
goes into an operation thinking he will kill the maximum number of people possible. Now, I'll just take you to the Riyasi incident last year.
Right.
Here
That
was a
was
busload
a
of
bus
more
of
than
Hindu
50.
pilgrims.
Yeah, a busload of Hindu pilgrims. So the selectivity, the targeting of Hindus is common to both the incidents. Uh, in the first burst, probably, the driver was killed, the bus rolled into the khud. They kept firing at the bus for some time, they did not go down into the khud. Now consider that if they had stayed, if the bus had remained on the road, they would probably have killed every last one of those 50 odd people who were on the bus. So then we would have had all these conspiracy theories being imposed on that incident. What has happened? It is Modi's takeover of power. Somebody has come, somebody is going, somebody is talking to some leader in the world. All these are impositions of patterns after the event. Riyasi could have been a 50 fatality incident. It was didn't More than 42 people suffered bullet injuries in that incident, by the way.
Right.
Only nine died.
And many were fortunate to survive.
Exactly. Only nine died out of 42 who actually suffered bullet wounds. So, on many parameters, Riyasi could have been a much bigger incident than this. So, then what was the pattern then? And why is Riyasi not important? Why is this one important? Because in this one, through a sort of a confluence of circumstances, a larger number of people died. If you go through the last years, not just last year, but last several years, and if you go through the decade, you will see dozens and dozens of such incidents, which were bigger or which could have been much bigger. And
Absolutely.
you will, by the way, also see incidents in future, which are likely to be comparable or even worse than what has now
And
happened
and
in
and
Baisara.
why do you say that, Ajay? I mean, the argument we're given is that by going to war or threatening to go to war against Pakistan, we impose a level of deterrence on the Pakistani military, which leads it to scale back its support for these jihadists, which in turn leads to a fall on violence. Is there a flaw in that rationale, or
The flaw is the record of history, which does not confirm any such deterrent value to these incidents or these operations. Let me remind you that the Americans carried out not one, not 10, not 100, but thousands of drone attacks against terrorists and terrorist leaders. on Pakistani soil. And that failed to deter the Pakistanis from continuing to support the Taliban, who was at that time killing on a daily basis coalition forces and, of course, Afghan national forces of the government at that juncture. And that was a much more powerful adversary. That was America, which had so many other tools they could employ against Pakistan.
Right.
We don't
You
have
had
that many. Now, let me continue with this for a moment. Uh, they also had the Abbottabad incident, where Osama bin Laden is discovered right next to the Kakul Academy, Officers Training Academy. Everything is proven. These people are killed on Pakistani soil. There is no relenting whatsoever on support to terrorism across the border into Afghanistan at a time when they are fighting American-led coalition forces. Why do you think
right.
one-off incidents of the nature that we have been executing, the surgical strikes, Balakot, and the current much larger campaign? Let's not try to suggest that what is being done now is irrelevant. It is going to change many things. But you have to understand three levels of impact. There is the tactical, and the tactical impact that was sought was to punish those who had done this
Right.
or who were responsible for it. Now we can ask ourselves, has it been achieved? Yes, infrastructure has been destroyed. This has been a very successful operation in terms of the intended targets and the precision of targeting. Some terrorists may have been killed, but the main people have escaped. And they have escaped because we sought to drum up these operations long before they occurred. So these people
Right.
were moved out very recently.
We had
Now come at the
reports from
operational level.
Reuters on the. Sorry, we had just to
Exactly.
let our audience know.
Operationally, also, this is a very successful model. It has completely shifted the rules or the lines that had been drawn in the past. But what will that result in? Not deterrence, which is the strategic objective. That's the third level. What it will result in is adaptation. Now you will not have Masood Azhar sitting in Bahawalpur in all likelihood in future. He is going to have to find ways to constantly move and hide himself and find locations that are not easy to penetrate.
Right.
Which
Is
will
not
make
difficult when you
which
have a
will have some
nation state
operation.
supporting you.
Yeah, and that will have some operational impact, no doubt. But will it be a deterrent? Is Masood Azhar going to give up, or Hafiz Muhammad Saeed and their cohorts, are they going to give up the entire enterprise? Is the Pakistan army, which is supporting them and creating them, in fact, going to give up the entire enterprise? You have seen the speech that Masood Azhar has given, promising vengeance. So, at the strategic level, if the objective was deterrence, it is a failure. At the tactical and operational level, this operation is very definitely a success.
I again want to just bring you back to this deterrence business, though. Operation Parakram. If we go back to 2001, 2002, the attack on Parliament, these two armies confront each other for the best part of a year. Um, we don't go to war, but violence does fall subsequent to that, and there is a ceasefire under General Musharraf. Similarly, after 2019, the Balakot strikes, violence against does show a downward trend. Uh, is that not some level of evidence that the Pakistan army is willing to rein in its friends, its proxies, in response to Indian coercive pressure, or are we drawing, a false correlation here between these
I
events?
think you are drawing false correlations. You are acting as if only one development occurred, and that was Parakram or that was Balakot. Incidentally, after the surgical strikes, fatalities actually go up.
Right,
The
where they have a
2016
number of
strikes.
Fedayeen attacks on targets
Exactly.
in Jammu and Kashmir.
Exactly. So why are we suddenly saying that Balakot was very successful because fatalities come down? Fatalities come down, Balakot happened. These are two independent incidents. There are other factors that explain. Fatalities go down to a level that is still very much higher than the level that had been secured in 2012-13.
Right.
So, what are we comparing with? Just the previous year? And thereafter, there are fluctuations. Fatalities go down, then they go up again. And
Right.
fatalities go down in a situation where you lock down the entire population for the better part of 6 months,
And
suspend
you have,
all internet
oh,
connectivity.
because of
So,
first because of the restrictions that were imposed
post
after
370.
370, and then
Yes.
COVID happened.
So, you can't just sort of have this, I would suggest, almost childish pattern of correlation. Oh, this happened, then fatalities went down. So, fatalities went down because of that. First of all, even in general, if you have far more data, correlation is not causation. You have to establish
Right.
causation independently. And here you are talking about trying to establish a causal link between one incident and a long term trend. So I'm sorry, I don't buy the argument that any of these things, Parakram and thereafter, what was Pakistan deterred by? Please understand, this is after the 9/11 attack in America. Massive operations have started off in Afghanistan. There is tremendous pressure on Pakistan from external pressure on Pakistan. The global tolerance of terrorism has suddenly evaporated. Everybody saying, oh, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Nobody in the West was saying that anymore. For the first time, if you see the commentary of the preceding period and the commentary thereafter, I remember at that point of time, even up to 2003, 2004, Kashmir was not recognized as a terrorist issue in the West. I remember the last report of the global threat of terror, which is now been replaced by the country reports on terrorism. I had written on it. I think this was in 2004, but I will not be very sure in my recollection. I described it as a tale told by an idiot because 2001, 2, 3, 4 was still seeing 3,000, 2,000 fatalities a year. 4 was 2001 saw more than 4,000 fatalities. And they report 5 or 6 fatalities, including non-fatal incidents of terrorism in Jammu Kashmir. And that was the bias. That was simply that, oh, all this is actually something else. It's a freedom struggle. It's not terrorism. And thereafter, pressure has grown. The world recognizes these actions as being terrorism. It has inflicted far greater pressure on Pakistan. Pakistan had to deploy substantial force on the Afghan borders under American pressure, hence had to withdraw substantial force from its eastern border with India, hence did not want to take the calibration of terrorism beyond a certain level.
Right.
Parakram was also very sort of expensive operation on both sides. We lost a lot of lives. Hundreds of lives were lost in Parakram without a bullet being fired.
That's right.
So it's very easy, after the event to declare victory and say, oh, this is all happened because of what we did. It did happen because of what we did. The stabilization in Kashmir has occurred because of the diminution of Pakistan's capacities to sustain a high intensity conflict in Jammu Kashmir and the progressive consolidation of the security grids and the strategies and tactics employed by the security forces. Not of policy, just
Right.
simply of the security force consolidation. And that has resulted in this steady decline. One element that is there, which is a consequence of Parakram, but which was also under tremendous, everyone knows that the Americans intervened at that time, was the ceasefire agreement with Musharraf, which allowed
Right.
the fence to be built. Before that, we could not construct a fence along the border with Pakistan
Because there
because
was
every time a
constant
work
fire
team,
on people
yeah, every
working.
time a work team went up, they would start artillery fire on them. And after that, the fence got constructed, and the fence made infiltration infinitely more difficult. Not impossible, but infinitely more difficult. And that was a positive outcome. But that was not deterrence. That was an outcome of a confluence of all these factors.
So, to flesh that out a little bit further, when you speak of the consolidation of the security grid, one of the things we've seen over the last couple of years, because of the crisis on the line of actual control with China, was that a number of troops were moved out. There was consequently an uptick in attacks on security forces, particularly in the remote parts of Jammu and Kashmir. Um, but much of that violence was focused on military targets. Yet, there's been relatively little success in neutralizing or killing these groups operating in the area. After Pahalgam, we've seen, in fact, that the perpetrators have not been identified. Nobody seems to have any idea where they've gone. Does that show that despite these troops coming back from the line of control, there's of actual control, excuse me, there's still something wrong with the security grid? If so, what might that be?
Uh, the idea that there is a magical solution to all this, the idea that we can have zero terrorism in a theater which has been in violent conflict for 35 years is fundamentally flawed. Incidents will keep on occurring. You can put in another 500,000 troop over there. Go back to Margaret Thatcher and what the IRA told her. We have to be lucky all the time. You have to be lucky only once. Sorry, the other way around.
The other way around, yes.
Yeah, the other way. You have to be lucky all the time. We have to be lucky only once. So there will always be vulnerabilities. You will move force in one place. They will adapt. After all, it is a thinking enemy. It is not. These are not animals. They may be moral animals, but they are
People
human
with a
beings with
brain
an
and
intelligence of their own. And they're adapting constantly. They're studying the entire situation. They're finding weaknesses. But please understand, we've gone from thousands of incidents a year to hundreds of incidents a year to now these barely the scores of incidents in the year. Now you can't say, oh, the grid has failed because 8 incidents occurred. The grid has succeeded because we have brought it down from 5,000, 7,000 incidents to 20 or 30 incidents. And then what are the other successes of the grid? How many people have been arrested? How many people are, not only the grid, but the entire system? How many people have been charged? How many people are being prosecuted? How many investigations are finding more and more success in courts? All these are factors which show you that the system is not only improving, but it has been enormously improved. And before we jump to the conclusion that this is all because of 370, let me remind you that the largest gain against terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir was under the man who is described as the weakest prime minister we've ever had, Manmohan Singh, who inherited a situation where the preceding year there were almost 3,000 fatalities, and by 2012 had brought down fatalities to 121. So if we are to attribute the successes to the leadership, then I'm afraid we have to concede that Manmohan Singh was the greatest counter-terrorism leader we've ever had. Because he didn't only do that there. After disastrous years, 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, by 12, 13, even the Maoist movement had been decimated, had been brought into a sliver of territory, with fatalities dropping radically as compared to the peak of over 1,000 fatalities, 1,100 fatalities at one point of time.
So here is a question. I mean, all our theaters of violence, whether they are Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir, have seen these periodic terrible massacres of Hindus being targeted. Traditionally, Indian governments lived with them. They accepted them as part of the problem of terrorism to be addressed domestically. Do you think that the idea of responding across the border to Pakistan in Pakistan is fundamentally flawed? Because this was a debate that really accelerated after 26/11. There was a great deal of stick handed out to Manmohan Singh for not attacking Pakistan. Do you think that was the wiser thing to do in that case?
Neither of the options is wise.
Okay.
The problem with Manmohan Singh and the preceding governments was that they had only two, what you would say, policy options: talking or not talking. So some major incident would happen and say, we are not talking to you. Then after a certain while, exhaustion would set in. They would say, all right, let's start talking to these guys again. And that exhausted the policy spectrum. Now we are not talking anyways. That's gone. That's an option. Now the policy spectrum is exhausted by war or no response. There is a very wide spectrum of responses available that can inflict costs on Pakistan, which will eventually prove to be unbearable and force it to alter its not only policies and strategies, but its mindset. Eventually, they will be forced to accept that the costs they are paying are not worth what they are fighting for. But that
And
requires
what in your view?
one last line on that. That requires a sustained strategy over the decades. I would like to suggest that if we have a 20-year strategy consistently pursued against Pakistan, this problem will be resolved in 3 to 5 years. If we continue doing what we are doing right now, which is looking at the next few weeks or the next few months, we will still be fighting them 50 years down the line.
And what would the elements of a consistent strategy be? So we've seen the government announce that it is placing the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance, whatever that means, but it's presumably some kind of threat to walk out of the treaty and build more dams in the future. We've seen sort of these assertions that we won't trade with Pakistan, stopping Indian entities from even routing goods through third countries. Are these the elements of a strategy that you would advocate, or are you
I would
talking about
suggest these are
something?
just the beginning elements. I mean, I regard it, and I said this several times over the past few days, that I regard that the suspension of the Indus Water Treaty is the most promising. It has no impact at present, apart from raising apprehensions in Pakistan. But over time, this could be very, very serious. Even if we are successful, Pakistan has blocked us even from fully utilizing our own waters to
Right.
which we have rights, by going to the tribunal, by bringing in so-called independent arbitration, all that sort of
Endless
nonsense.
legal
Endless processes, using these legal processes. And that's a very good, that is one possibility. That, you see, Pakistan exploits the entire spectrum of instrumentalities. This is called lawfare. I will block you off by just simply going on with simply bloody-minded litigation. The purpose is not, I know I'm wrong, I'm going to lose eventually. But the process will eat up 5 years of development in a particular sphere as far as my adversary is concerned. So lawfare is one element. Economic warfare is another element. And by economic warfare, I don't mean blowing things up on the other side. I mean calibrating interventions, and overwhelmingly all we are talking about is going to be covert. You don't announce it. Yes, you've announced, for instance, suspension of trade. But that's not the only instrumentality available for economic warfare. There are ways to undermine the adversary's economy. And I'm not going to discuss any details over here. I'm only going to give very well known strategic parameters of what is called protracted conflict, or in the Chinese lexicon, unrestricted war. So they say everything, every instrumentality, cyber, political subversion, bribery, information warfare, which we are doing so well nowadays, so much so that neither side knows what is happening. And that's brilliant. I mean, that's something that needs to be done. But the problem is that we are doing it more to our own people rather than to the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis don't believe a word of what we are saying. We don't believe a word of what the Pakistanis are saying. But domestic populations on both sides are consuming the national or nationalistic narrative, hook, line, and sinker. That's the problem. Our propaganda and our information warfare is directed against our own populations. They're not directed against the adversary.
So one of the
So
means of
information warfare then becomes another aspect. So in this manner, they are a divided country. They are a country at war with or in conflict with itself. They have armed movements ongoing. They are a politically divided country. They are deep fissures. They are communally or at least sectarian, divided along sectarian lines. Each of these fissures can be widened through extremely small, extremely subtle interventions. And that needs to be done through study first, through planning, and then through very slow, consistent implementation across governments. This is not 6 months, this is not even 6 years. But as I said before, if we think of something that and pursue something with a vision for 20 years, we could solve this in 5.
One of the arguments that used to be made at an earlier stage was, and I think the current National Security Advisor Ajit Doval wrote this in an essay in the Indian Police Journal, was that the age of conventional warfare is over. It's too expensive, too messy. I paraphrase here. Requires vast resources, raises the risk of escalation, and therefore you needed to deploy offensive covert means. Now, he didn't spell out what he meant, but for example, we have a book by B. Raman, a former senior officer in RAW, saying that in Punjab there was a tit for tat strategy at one stage, that if you blow up a bomb here, we'll set off a bomb there. Do you think that kind of offensive covert strategy would be more effective than the conventional military means we're using now? Or is that also a dead end in some ways?
Well, two factors. One, this borrowed idea that conventional war is history. This is something the West has been talking about for the last several decades. And yet we have so many conventional wars ongoing all over the world. Yet we are
Ukraine
talking
and
about the
Russia.
possibility of a world war again as the Chinese power rises, the Western power declines. We are talking about major hotspots across the world where conventional. I think this was an easy cop out by a lot of people who no longer wanted to invest in defense. The reality is that conventional war is with us and will probably remain with us as long as states are around.
Right.
A second front has also opened out, which is this whole idea of subconventional warfare, or has expanded. Subconventional warfare has been a reality through all periods of history.
Right.
Subversion, terrorism, all that sort of thing. Every age of history has had that ongoing alongside other wars. So basically, we may say that the role of these smaller non-state movements or proxy wars has grown in the recent past. But to suggest that we can now dismantle our regular armies and just concentrate on, setting off bombs in each other's territories is not very bright, if you ask me. The second thing is tit for tat doesn't work. A country like Pakistan takes into account the loss of life on its side also. In any event, I mean, the common man is fodder. You know, it's only if you are able to hit value targets. And even then, as I said before, I mean, they were hitting high value targets. The Americans were hitting high value targets right across Pakistan. And that didn't
That's right.
stop the
I mean,
Pakistanis. So please understand, again, I come back to the same thing. It's not a question of conventional war or tit for tat terrorism. Yes, you can carry out covert operations. I told you one of the possibilities is covert kinetic operations. There are other disruptive operations that can probably do infinitely more harm.
right.
Cyber operations can do tremendous harm, and they can do kinetic harm. The Stuxnet intervention in Iran actually blew up their centrifuges. That's kinetic harm done through a little worm in your computer. So all these things are consequently legitimate, if I may use the word rather loosely, or let us say acceptable instrumentalities of state policy under the protracted war or the unrestricted war paradigm. They cannot be they cannot be adopted arbitrarily. They cannot be adopted fitfully. They have to be based on a study of the strengths and vulnerabilities of the adversary system under the formulation that we must undermine the strengths, erode the strengths, and exploit the vulnerabilities.
Final question, Ajay. You mentioned earlier that the ceasefire on the line of control had been very helpful in putting up fencing and diminishing infiltration. We had a ceasefire in 2021, which was considered a very helpful step again in tapering down the levels of violence to the very low levels we saw in the last couple of years. Now, with the border, with the line of control aflame again, there's been reports of renewed infiltration, more numbers of jihadists coming in. Do you anticipate in the midterm that Pakistan will be deterred by whatever military action we are taking now, or that it will use its jihadists to hit back as it did after 2016?
Nothing in what Pakistan is saying and doing right now suggests that there is an element of deterrence. They are responding to you literally on what tit for tat. You do something, they do something more or less in the same, calibrated at the same level, perhaps occasionally higher, perhaps occasionally higher the other side. But if they are not even responding, are not even deterred in the current and relatively hot, albeit restricted war, why would they be deterred when all this has cooled down? Because we've blown up a few buildings, killed a handful of low value terrorists, including one or two people of some value, because a few dozen civilians have been killed? Are you serious? Do you think either side, the government thinks the death of few dozen civilians matters? I mean, just please, look at all these operations and look at what happened. Baisaran was a terrible incident, Pahalgam. Terrible incident in its brutality, in the manner in which it was executed, everything. But to my mind, we have already lost more than 20 people in the firing, uh, the cross-border artillery exchanges that we've
Yes,
already had. We've already lost, the last I saw was a figure of about 20, 21 civilian lives lost.
right.
26 lives. And by the time this ends, that number may be much more. And we still don't know how many servicemen we have lost because there is no
Right.
information on such things. So at the end of the day, I don't think these lives matter. They matter only if we make them an issue, as we chose to make Baisaran an issue. And in this, I would say this is the gravest policy failure is to allow a group of 4 to 6 terrorists to manipulate and dictate responses by a nation of more than 150 crores. We are a vast country. We are a vast country. We are a powerful country. And if every time someone sets up a bomb here, we can be, like a chabi ka khilona. We sent off to the front and sent off to war and sent off to bombing people. It's wonderful. It no longer will require the Pakistani state to initiate this. 3 guys with a bomb can do it. And every time there are 3 guys with a bomb who kill more than a certain tolerable minimum of people, of civilians, we're off to war again. Where is your independence of thought? And then what is the nature of your response or reaction? I insist there must be a reaction. I insist. But you tom-tom the response for a good 2 weeks, put the adversary system on the highest levels of alert, and then initiate operations. I mean, there's this old saying which keeps on coming up: revenge is a dish best served cold. Sit back. Make one announcement. We will strike them at a time of our own choosing. And then let them go. Then go to sleep. But
And right.
nobody has the shoulders today. Nobody has the strength today to accept the opprobrium that would come after that. Everybody would say, oh, this government is weak. This government has failed. That requires courage. That requires a confidence that, no, I am going to do harm to Pakistan that it truly cannot imagine. This is no harm. I go across, I bomb a few places. I'm very sorry to say that the total physical damage that was done in the first phase of this operation, those 9 targets, would not even be worth the cost of one plane if we have lost a plane. And we
Well,
have
on
to
that,
eventually, just this one last phrase, eventually we will have to assess this operation in terms of mutual costs. And if the Pakistanis truly or falsely can convince themselves that they have inflicted a cost on us which is proportionate to the cost we have inflicted on them, you have zero deterrence.
we have zero deterrence. And I think one of the key points again you're making is that, apart from revenge best being served cold, you also need the means to deliver vengeance, which involves sustained investment, which we haven't made. We've been running very low defense budgets for a great number of years now.
Very low
Uh,
intelligence budgets.
budgets and very low intelligence budgets, very low police modernization budgets across the spectrum. With that slightly depressing thought, though, a reflective one, because whatever happens in the next few days will not be the end of this story. Thank you for your time, Dr. Sani.
Thank you for having me.